Hey friends, it's RSKT, and I just released my first ever sample pack. Sample pack's like a collection of sounds that musicians can use to make music with. I just launched it just last week, and it seemed to go really well. People are really happy with it. Now, when sample packs are produced, they're usually released with a bit of artwork, like an album cover in a way. Luckily, a while back, I started an illustration and I completely bailed on it because it was just something that I really wasn't happy with. I hated the way that it all came together in the end, and it was just sitting on my hard drive, taking up space. I never planned on releasing this, but I did need a piece of artwork. So what I did is I went back to that, added in a few little special touches and special effects and whatnot, just to sort of make it look somewhat usable, and then slapped the logo in the middle of it. So yeah, this video is going to be an overview of how I went about making it from start to finish. I'm going to talk a lot about the mistakes that I made along the way, because I did not plan this illustration out from the beginning. It was something that I sort of finished one part of and then moved on to the next before sort of looking at the end result as a whole. And I think it really suffers because of that. But you guys let me know down below in the comments what you think of it. So yeah, as I said, I don't really want to make this a big long video. It's not something I'm particularly happy with, but I thought that it'd be interesting to at least show how I made this artwork in the first place, because I told the people on my music channel that I'd probably put a video up showing that. So yeah, sit back, enjoy, and let me know what you think. So without any clear goal in mind, I took a photo of the page from the Sketch with RSKT episode and just started doing some cleaner line work over the top. I already had the rough line work done for him with the pencil sketch, so I could just jump straight to the vector line work. Then I just started creating some clipping masks and shaded him in. And quite honestly, I think this is where the start of all the problems are, because I don't really have like a clear goal in mind. And sometimes that's okay, but I think for this illustration, I really should have just sketched out the rest of the environment and maybe even added in some other characters before proceeding. To shade this guy in, I followed the basic RSKT formula that you all know and love. Creating clipping masks, adding texture in there, and then doing some hard shadows and hard highlights over the top. And as for the main guy, I was pretty happy with him. And I think in hindsight, I probably should have drawn about 4 more characters that were very similar to him, kind of like huddled around him as if they're in some sort of prison. But I didn't, and I just decided to move straight onto the background. So for the background imagery, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to go with straight away. So I dragged in a few different stock images to help me get started. Basic like farmland background, and then got some image of like prison wire, and just started sort of sketching a rough layout over the top. So from this point, I really should have gone ahead and added in some more detail, like a much more detailed path before moving on to doing any more line work. But for some reason I didn't. I was very unsure about how this one was going to turn out at the start, and I think it's probably the first artwork I've done where it really goes to the border of the screen, which I think is another problem. So you can see me following the same process here, just to add in some barrels of toxic waste. So I mostly had the foreground elements done at this point, so really all that was left to do was do the midground and background. I really wish that I added a few more things on the barrels, maybe like some mutated frogs and geckos or mushrooms or something, but I just decided to move on. As for the inspiration for the background, I think I was listening to a lot of Tool at the time, like re-listening to the 10,000 Days album. And those that know that album know that there's a song on there called Rosetta Stoned, and it tells quite an interesting story. And the background is kind of influenced from that story. It's sort of what I picture in my head whenever I listen to it. I always listen to music whenever I create stuff like this, and it definitely plays a big part in the direction that I take my artwork. So here you can see that I'm doing a chain link fence over to the side. This was definitely a very time consuming process, and I wish that I spent a little bit more time on it, making it look better. I wasn't even sure if I was going to keep it in the end, and because I abandoned this project so early, I did wind up keeping it. Next was to do the midground, and again, wasn't really sure what direction to go in, so I dragged and dropped a bunch of different stock imagery on there and just started painting some textures on top. I knew that I wanted some sort of sunset leading up to the night sky in the background, so I just added in a basic gradient to help me get started. Here you can see that to simulate the night sky, I've just gotten a stock image of some stars, pasted it over the top, and then played around with some adjustment settings just to make it blend in a bit nicer. Next up was doing the rocket ships and their flight paths, or like the sort of smoke that they're leaving behind. I kind of wanted this picture to like show as if he's like left behind and everybody else is evacuating this planet because it's about to go kaboom or something like that. And he's just sort of looking up stranded, not knowing what to do. So I wound up just drawing their smoke in with a bunch of different shapes, combined them together, and then just played around with some blur settings to blend it into the background so that it wasn't too overpowering. Next up is the moon. Originally, I was going to crack the moon apart and sort of show it like splitting in different chunks, but I thought that I would leave that to last. And again, because I did abandon this project so early on, I never wound up getting to it. So a lot of the background of this image at this point has just been a lot of photo bashing. Even for the chain link fence's shadow, I've just duplicated the whole shadow layer and laid it out onto the ground, and then sort of blurred it and made it all black so that it just casts the shadow in some direction. Now, I had like a pretty clear idea of where to take it from here, but again, I just wasn't really feeling it. I wasn't too happy with the way everything was going at this point. All the same, I felt it best to just trudge on, and you can see me playing around with a lot of different adjustment layers as I go through. So just to take a break and have a little bit more of a chat about the process at the moment, I think a lot of the mistakes of this piece definitely stem from not having a clear direction in which way the composition should go, all of the colors that I want to use, and there's just not enough elements. A lot of my artwork is usually quite busy, and this one's quite barren. Yeah, there's a lot of like detail and stuff in there, but there's not really a great deal for viewers to actually look at. I mean, we've just got some barrels, a bunch of foliage, a guy, a fence, the moon, and the spaceships in the background. I think if I had have doubled the length of this piece, so it's just sort of doubled the width, and maybe added in a few more characters like him that sort of help tell a bit more of a story. I think another part of the end results issue is that it relies too much on photo bashing. And I think originally I intended to come back and do the sky by hand and actually paint in all of the stars and everything, but in the end I just didn't. So yeah, there's just so much about this piece that I'm not entirely happy with. I think it's a good start for something, but I definitely think that if I had have taken the time at the very beginning to plan everything out before just going gung-ho, it probably would have turned out a lot better. On a positive note, I did have a lot of fun experimenting with this. I tried a few different things in the way that I color stuff and sort of add in lighting directions. I used foliage and some more photo-like elements for the piece. And I think some of it worked and some of it didn't. So if I did get anything out of this, it was a better understanding of how all of these things can be blended together in a more interesting way. Next up, I wanted some sort of lookout tower, kind of because I was listening to that Tool song. There's a lot of mentions about Area 51 in there, and I thought it'd be cool to have like an old military lookout tower sort of overgrown in the desert here. So I just started drawing that in. I traced the stock image of an old military lookout, and at first, it looks pretty clean, but then I come back and I sort of make all of the lines a bit more crooked and make it look really old and run down. You'll see with the military tower and the siren that I'm adding in here, another problem starts to arise. And again, this is because of the lack of drafting, but it's the amount of detail that I put in these, because I wind up adding an awful lot of detail and an awful lot of shadow work and highlights. But when you zoom out and look at the whole piece, none of that detail is visible. It's completely pointless, and I really should have just muddied up the texture and cast most of it in shadow with some sort of larger highlights to emphasize specific areas. I definitely broke a lot of my own rules in doing this, and while that felt really freeing at the time, I think the end result suffered for it. Now you can just see me adding in some more foliage and stuff on the ground around the bunker. I don't know if I've said it yet, but I'm using Frankentoon's nature pack here. There's so many awesome foliage brushes here, and when you start layering them all up at different colors, you can get some really fantastic looking results. Now I'm just coming in and trying to add a mountainscape in the background, just trying to sort of emphasize like he's kind of out in the middle of the desert, but because of this toxic waste stuff, there's like a bit of greenery and dying shrubs and stuff growing around him. A lot of this work that I'm doing here is just sort of touch-up stuff with different color correction layers and lens adjustments and whatnot, adding in a little bit of noise and high-pass filters here and there as I go through. And then once the siren was done, I did toy around with adding in a few mushrooms, but I honestly just sort of sat back, looked at the whole piece, and just fell out of love with it. I was really disappointed with the result of how everything had turned out. I don't know, maybe I'm being too hard on myself. You guys let me know down below in the comments. But I just don't think that this is like a good RSKT piece. That said, of course, I did wind up coming back and using the end result. I think I usually like a lot of my artwork to be printed on like clothing and stickers and stuff. And while I could erase parts of the border here using like different shape brushes and probably get away with doing something like that, I just don't think I ever will. Now, when I made my sample pack, I knew that I needed some artwork for it, and I did not have time to sit down and do a full piece from scratch. Part of the thing that I didn't like about the end result of this illustration to begin with was the dead space in the middle. Usually I like having the middle as the focus of the image, something for the viewer to look at. Everything that the viewer is meant to focus on in this picture is literally around the edges. The barrels are down the bottom corner, the guys on the left-hand side, the rocket ships are up in the top right corner, and even the military bunker and siren are on the right-hand side. So there's not really like anything drawing the viewer's eyes to the middle, and it just lacks a lot of balance because of that. Now, fortunately, I knew that if I was going to use this for my sample pack artwork, I didn't have to start something from scratch, and I could just whack a logo straight in the middle of it and deal with half of those problems. So now the focus is in the middle, and you've got all this cool stuff to look at around the side. Now, I didn't screen record any of this, but something else that I did was go in and separate the background, middle ground, and foreground, and the very near foreground. And I put in lens blur adjustments in there. So the background is now blurred out a little bit. The middle ground is blurred out a little less. The foreground where he's standing is in focus, and then you can see some of the foliage right at the very front is blurred out, and that's just to sort of make it look like if this was taken with a camera, he's the main event, he's the main focus, and everything else is sort of out of focus, like we've got like a little bit of aperture setting going on. Something else I did, which you can probably tell, is I did a absolute ton of color correction. I really wanted the colors to sort of fall into place and look a lot more pleasing to the eye. I added other things in just to sort of up the detail level a little bit in these textures. So I used things like high pass filters and the tone mapping persona in Affinity Photo, and then sort of layered that on with different blend modes to both the shadows and highlights. And I think the end result looks fine. Again, maybe I'm being too hard on myself, but I think it looks fine for what it is for the sample pack. I'm really happy that it's finally out there, and I can at least cross this failed illustration off of my list as something that I did, something that I put out there, and at least I got to make a piece of content with it. Cool. So yeah, as I said earlier, let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. I'd love to hear your feedback. Do you think that this illustration turned out all right? I don't know. I still have very mixed feelings about it. I think I'm too caught up in my own head about the overall process of it, how unhappy I was with that. But anyways, that's just the way it is. I'm really looking forward to moving on to a whole new piece of artwork if I get the chance. But yeah, that's it from me. Hit the like if you like, and if you don't, tell me why. Please subscribe, check me out on Patreon, and thanks. I'll see you in the next one.